It's going to be the best class ever.
This specific session.
Yeah, this session and every session that follows. Are you ready?
That's hard to tell.
Mr. Pensky, you ready?
I'm always ready. I'm game.
All right.
I should leave that. I'm probably going to ruin it.
No.
All right, so here we go. Just we're going to finish up quiz B. And we're going to tackle quiz C. So who's going to read the first question? To be a success in the marketplace today, the best companies will focus on country as a primary segmentation variable. True or false? False. Why? Why is country probably not the best, when we think about global marketing, the best way to segment the market?
Too many other smaller variables.
There's other variables, and remember what we're trying to do is group together potential customers that have similar needs and wants, and the country level, exactly, is too general. And very often we're going to have trouble, depending on the category, of course, grouping together potential customers into segments that are large, because we said large is an important criteria, and also reachable with similar needs and wants that are going to respond to the marketing mix in a similar way. So certainly looking at a market from that perspective is helpful, but that's not really the key to successfully segmenting a market or being successful in global marketing. So the answer to that is false. What about the second question? Who's going to read that? Smith, go ahead.
For number 2?
Correct.
Okay.
Do you have an extra one of B?
From a sociological perspective, for a sociological complaint, any idea perceived as new by a group of people is an innovation. True?
That's a different question. So the question is, with indirect exporting, the company sells to a customer in another country. Is that true or false?
False.
False. And that's talked about on page 345, which specifically says that the company sells to another buyer. So whether it's going to be an importer or a distributor, for example, not a customer. All right, who's going to read the third question?
The statement only in America can international market requirements be an afterthought is an example of American ethnocentrism.
Right, absolutely. So the answer to that question is A, ethnocentrism. And that's talked about on page 334. Everybody got that?
Yep.
So what's ethnocentrism?
You think that that your ethnicity and your customs are kind of the center point and that everything else is an aberration from it.
Yeah, so that, and it's obviously quite presumptuous for us to think, if we're ethnocentric in our thinking as the manager or executives of a particular company, that our culture, our norms, our ways is what's relevant everywhere around the world. And we know that that's not the case, regardless of whether it's an American culture or a Japanese culture, Russian culture, whatever the culture is that we know that there are substantial variations in culture around the world, and there's certainly significant differences in the needs and wants of potential customers around the world. So having that ethnocentric outlook is definitely not the key to success in global marketing. In fact, we could certainly argue that that's going to result in us failing as a global marketing organization. Because remember, we said one size does not fit all. Standardized products or the standardization of products is not the key. Adaptation, customizing our product to the needs of the local market. That's what's going to help us be successful as global marketers. Now, mind you, that doesn't mean that from a manufacturing standpoint, standardization is not a good thing. Of course, it's simple. We're going to achieve a lot of efficiency, and we're going to minimize complexity, but we have to meet the needs of the customer. Can't be this production-oriented mentality where we're just kind of try and sell what we could make. Remember, we have to think as marketers and make what we could sell. Two very different perspectives. Now, as scary as it might seem, there are some companies that have a production-oriented mentality, which means that they just try and figure out ways to sell products that they know how to make. But isn't it better to do what we described and identify an unmet need in the marketplace and then develop products, and if necessary, develop the capability to produce those products that customers want? Number 4. Number 4. Who's going to read that? Go ahead, Noah.
Nestle focuses on dominating markets in the world arena. The company has 4 primary points in its highly successful international strategy. Which of the following would not be among those 4 points? Adapt to local, standardize so that all becomes one.
Right, exactly. So their approach recognizes that standardization is not ideal from a marketing standpoint. But what do they think is compelling? What do they say here is to operate as a decentralized organization so that you empower the domestic operations. So you may want to have some centralization in the organization, which means that headquarters is making some decisions for the strategic business units. And in some cases that could make sense, but generally not for marketing related issues. That's when you really rely on your country managers and your local area managers who are close enough to the market to make the best decision possible. They know what the market needs are. In headquarters, what do we know? What do we know about consumers' tastes, preferences, requirements, needs and wants in any number of more than 100 different countries around the world? How could that possibly be our area of expertise in headquarters? That's why we have strategic business units. Am I missing something there?
Would you say that there's less of a country of origin aspect in that specific respect? Meaning, since you know it's they're acting locally, I guess, you know, each wherever they are, they, you know, it's perceived more as a product of, you know, of that country as opposed to something imported.
Well, yeah, absolutely. So if we're manufacturing domestically, then the country of origin is not an issue.
Not a factor.
Right, but in this scenario that you're suggesting, it means that we've already decided that our mode of entry is foreign direct investment. Whereas that may not be the case. Maybe we're exporting to that particular market, but we're exporting a product that's been customized or tailored in some way, and it's still, in this case, let's say, being shipped from the United States. It's still a product that's manufactured in the United States, but we customized it for that local market. Mm-hmm. So in that scenario, then the country of origin would be very relevant, mm-hmm, because they know that it's made in the United States.
Do you know Nestle's doing now that, like, the whole Arab Spring? Like, it sounded like from the book that they basically were building infrastructure everywhere in, like, the Eastern world, you know, to take over. So when that, you know, when the time came that they could produce and basically, you know, conquer. So, like, now that, you know, dictatorships have been thrown down, you know how they're doing?
Well, I don't think that it's too early to draw a conclusion about their success. But certainly they've already been operating as a global organization, right, and have manufacturing facilities in many markets and certainly are exporting, well, at a minimum, exporting to more than 100 different countries. But it's too early to really tell how successful they've been or they will be in the markets that you mentioned. But certainly, yeah, they see that as an opportunity.
Right, I just thought it very funny, like, because clearly the book wasn't written when the whole Arab Spring was happening. So it was basically, I mean, it kind of foreshadowed, you know, like it was just very relevant to what's happening now.
Right, absolutely. And so, remember that I tell you that sometimes when we're ahead of the curve, when we're being true visionaries, that people might laugh at you. And did I tell you that early in my career, I've had people laugh at me when I presented ideas, and then because usually what people can respond to is what they already see in the marketplace, either being used by others or on the shelf at retail or being advertised. But to get somebody to anticipate, like what we're trying to do, is the needs and wants in the future, right? That takes a unique skill and ability. And so people make assessments based on what they know, not what's going to be in a year from now. And so sometimes people make assessments about potential new products with that in mind, not understanding what the future trends are going to be, which is like what you're talking about, is what is some of the future trends. And so they might have gotten, people might have laughed at them in the organization, some of the executives, when they were suggesting that. Say, what are you kidding? What are you, really? You're going to be a major food provider, distributor, or marketer in Libya, Egypt, or any one of those countries? They thought, they would probably think, oh, you got to be crazy. But when you do the country analysis, remember, one of the things that we're going to certainly look at is political risk, political level of instability. So very likely some of the executives, they evaluated those markets in the Middle East and said, you know, really the level of political instability is very high. And right now, it would be impractical for us to build manufacturing facilities there and spend billions of dollars. But we're anticipating that those regimes are going to fall, and so we need to set ourselves up, like you were suggesting, so that when that does happen, we're in a position to take advantage of that. So they said decentralization is key. Stick to what you know. So that means focus. Stick to what you know means that you need to be focused. And there's no longer rewards in the marketplace, namely Wall Street specifically, for diversification. That used to be a very popular strategy, diversification. But the market is looking for organizations that are focused and have developed a core competence in a particular area and are able to leverage that, instead of trying to be in a lot of different categories and really not being an expert or a market share leader in any one of them. And certainly here they talk about, in the food industry, adapting to local tastes, which is really key. And that's the, in large part, the key to the success of McDonald's around the world, because they have McDonald's that are operating in numerous markets, right? Dozens and dozens of different markets around the world, because they've adapted their menu to meet the needs of the local taste. What did I say? To adapt to the needs of the local market and the taste preferences of those markets. So some markets prefer food that's spicy, some not spicy, and then there's some markets that
Dietary restriction.
yeah, that don't eat beef. But they have McDonald's in India. You say, well, how do you sell hamburgers in India? I mean, that's crazy, right? Well, they sell the Big Mac. It's just that the Big Mac is not made of beef.
Soy.
Or mutton.
So I think that's an excellent example what McDonald's has been able to do around the world. All right, number 5. Go ahead, Evan.
What the following are benefits of global marketing instead? E?
Right, E. So international travel benefits, that's not really one of the benefits of global marketing. And I can tell you from experience, the novelty wears off pretty quick. You know, when you're on a 15-hour flight to, from JFK to Hong Kong, you know, the first couple of times it's really cool, but yeah, it's after a while it's not so much fun. But some of the benefits of global marketing are mentioned here. Enabling us to achieve economies of scale, transfer of experience and know-how, certainly financial benefits, and access to customers everywhere around the world.
That's what toughest means? For all around the world?
Yeah, well, how would you reach them? So one of the things we talked about when we talked about segmentation is that the customers have got to be reachable. That's a requirement. If they're not reachable, in other words, if we can't communicate with them through our marketing communications, then it's really a moot point, regardless of how large we might think the segment is, if we can't reach them through advertising.
Was toughest skill also referred to with like electronics in Japan? You know, like testing out your products with like, you know, seeing how they respond to it, because like they're tough customers. Like expectation-wise, electronics?
Yeah, it could be that in some markets that customers might have a higher level of expectation in terms of quality, for example, more difficult to sell to for a variety of reasons. Could be cultural, could be that they're late majority. So if it's a tough sell, so remember we have the innovators, the early adopters, the early majority. Then you have a segment that in the adoption curve that's known as late majority. So yeah, there's a reason why they're late adopters. And we could say that maybe they're tough customers to sell to. Importantly, we need to understand why. What is the reason? Why are they not purchasing the product? Why are they not adopting the product? Could be that the price is too high. So for a tablet like the iPad, maybe $700 is too much. And maybe even $500 is too much for a lot of customers. So maybe they're waiting for the price to go down to $300 or $200. And maybe that's the reason why people buy the Kindle, because of the price point. Even though you could argue that the iPad has more functionality, more features, more benefits. All right, question 6 about strategic planning. And so the benefits of global marketing are talked about on page 336. Let's talk about strategic planning. Who's going to read that question? Go ahead, Daniel.
What was answer number 5?
The answer to number 5 is all of these are benefits of global marketing except international travel benefits, which is E. 6, go ahead. Zelkowitz?
Sorry.
Oh, boy.
Strategic planning is conducted at the blend levels of management and deals with products, capital, and research and the long-term and short-term goals of the company. I believe that's tactical.
Well, the best answer is D, which is strategic planning is conducted at the highest levels of management and deals with the products, capital investment, research, and long and short-term goals of the company. And so when we develop the corporate plan, that's what fuels the business plan for the strategic business units and also the functional plans. So senior management develops the corporate plan, and it outlines the mission and the vision and the values for the organization, among other things, like some of which were mentioned here. And then we use those ideally as shared objectives for the entire organization. So that's going to drive the strategies and tactics of the strategic business units and also the operating departments. Does that make sense? So we all have to be trying to achieve the same objectives, but each strategic business unit is going to have different opportunities. The way that they achieve those objectives is going to be different than another strategic business unit in the organization, possibly. Because they're operating in different markets, different categories. But at the end of the day, all the strategic business units should be trying to achieve the same objectives, which are the objectives that are set by the highest level of management in the organization. And it's so critical to have these shared objectives throughout the organization. And maybe you sense in some of the positions that you've held already that there's somewhat of a disconnect between what you're working on and what other people are working on in the organization. That's a problem. That means that more than likely there's not clear shared objectives that everybody is trying to achieve. So what you're trying to do in your role should be trying to achieve the same end goal as somebody else, even though their roles and responsibilities are going to be different. But at the end of the day, the objective should be the same, which could be to maximize sales, to improve profitability, to increase market share, to improve customer satisfaction. Now in your role, there's certain responsibilities that you have that could impact those objectives that I mentioned. For Daniel, it's going to be different. His job is different. He has different roles and responsibilities than you, but both of you should be trying to achieve the same objectives. Number 7, and as talked about on page 338. What about number 7? Jason, go ahead.
Which of these phases provide the marketer with the basic information necessary to evaluate the potential of the proposed country market and identify problems that would eliminate the country from further consideration? It would be preliminary analysis and screening.
Right, absolutely. So the best answer there is definitely D. Preliminary analysis and screening provides the marketer with the basic information necessary to evaluate the potential of a proposed country market and identifies problems that would eliminate the country from further consideration. So what does that mean, actually? What is it that we find out in the preliminary analysis and screening? Because we're going to still need to do that country analysis, even though we had mentioned a few minutes ago that doing a segmentation based on country is not feasible because it's going to be challenging to find segments that have homogeneous needs and wants that are large. But here we're still suggesting that we need to target markets. We need to target markets that we want to penetrate. So once we identify some markets, we need to evaluate them. We need to do an assessment. What are some of the things that we're going to look at that are going to impact whether or not a particular country is going to be ideal for us to try and sell our products or services? What do you think? Go ahead, Daniel.
If they have the infrastructure that supports that product, they have the product complements.
Absolutely. So we need to evaluate the infrastructure in that particular country, which, for example, would mean, does the country have well-developed roads? Now you might think, wait a minute, what are you talking about? What do you mean roads? There's countries that don't have like roads? Yeah, there's countries that don't have roads. Well, they might be dirt roads, but we need to be able to transport our product from one part of the country, for example, to another, or from one country across the border into another country. And if we're a big operation and we have these truckloads of merchandise, you can't operate an 18-wheeler on a dirt road, can you? I mean, anybody ever try that? I think that's really, it's going to be a problem. And that's what Daniel's suggesting when we talk about infrastructure is, if we're trying to take advantage of a major market opportunity, this is not going to happen by pulling a cart with 20 pieces of our product. If we're selling sneakers, we're going to have truckloads of sneakers that we're going to want to try and sell in that particular market. And what about the rail system? So, okay, maybe the roads are not fully developed. Well, is there a rail system? So do you have a well-established train system where we could transport merchandise and supplies? So this is critical. That could definitely turn out to be a barrier for entry, depending on what it is that we want to sell and in what type of quantity. What about telecommunications? Is there access to the internet? Now I know you guys are thinking, there's something, whatever Coach had for lunch, there was something in that coffee. What do you mean, no access to the internet? You really have got to be kidding me. No, I'm not. I'm really not. There's some markets that don't have access to the internet. Well, just imagine, I mean, look how attached we all are to the internet and our smartphones. And then you tell me, well, wait, there's no towers there? There's no wireless communication? I mean, what happens when one of the towers go down in the city? People start losing their mind, right? People freak out. What, I don't have a signal. Then you find out that there was some sort of disruption and signal was lost for 15 minutes. So these are real issues that we need to evaluate. We need to go market by market by market and assess certainly one thing which is very substantial, a very significant issue that Daniel shared with us, is the infrastructure. You can't take that for granted. Don't think that there's a rail system there, or they have wireless communication, or they have internet, or they have paved roads that could go from one end of the country to the other. It might very well be not the case. So very important for us to understand that. And then what else besides infrastructure? Although infrastructure is certainly a big issue for us to consider. What else? What about political risk? Like you were suggesting, what is the level of political risk? Is this a market where we want to export? Is this a market where we want to build a manufacturing facility or open up a 1 million square foot distribution center? Or is there too much political risk? Is there too much civil unrest? Is our manufacturing facility going to become a target for a Tomahawk cruise missile? Now you might think that, you know, we don't see Scud missiles in the United States, but even in New York, we saw the World Trade Center come down. So anything is possible, but certainly in some markets, it's very common that Scud missiles are flying every day. But what happens if a few of those hit one of our manufacturing facilities? So we need to make that determination. How likely it is that our manufacturing facility would be damaged as part of some type of civil unrest, whether it's on the part of civilians or on the part of the military or the government. That's something that we'll have to evaluate. And do you think that's real? Like, think about the world as it exists now. Is that possible? Or do you think, well, that's kind of a far-fetched scenario? Or do you think that there's some markets where, yeah, the facility might actually get bombed? What do you think? I mean, is that relevant? Do we need to think about that?
I think so, but in reality, I feel like most companies think about that beforehand, and they don't build facilities in places that are.
But that's what we're saying. So this question addresses that, is that preliminary analysis to decide whether or not we should build a manufacturing facility there. And so what we're talking about now is that, well, we need to investigate each market and determine the likelihood that something like that might happen.
You shouldn't build a factory in Sderot.
What was that?
You shouldn't build a factory in Sderot, the city in Israel that gets scud missiles.
But there actually are.
But so we have to determine our level of the level of risk that we're willing to accept as an organization.
Well, companies also have to take into account other surrounding governments, which is why 10 years ago Starbucks decided not to go into Israel when it started expanding into the Arab nations, because the Arab nations told them, we won't have your stores if you're in Israel. So now there's other stores or companies that have to take that into consideration.
The company?
Valuing certain markets over other ones.
Oh, absolutely. So you have to decide which markets are going to be strategic, which markets are strategically important. So if you're in 6 markets, but you lose, that means you're going to lose 1. Yeah, and the same thing happens with distribution, even in the United States, where a lot of retailers, for example, won't carry a product if Walmart has that product. Because Walmart's operating structure is such that they're the low-cost producer in retail. So because their operating costs are much lower than other retailers, whatever product you sell them, they could sell it for less and still be profitable than other retailers. So to your point, when you show a given retailer a product, whether it's Target or Macy's, one of the things they're going to ask you is, does Walmart have this? And if they do, then you're going to, they definitely don't want it. Absolutely. It's like not even a question. So you're going to either have to develop a unique product for them, a unique variation of the product, and or a unique configuration of the product, maybe bundled with other products and unique packaging, so that somebody who sees the product in Macy's, for example, or even in Target, is going to realize that, oh, this is not exactly the same thing that Walmart has. And Walmart is selling a product that has similar functionality, but, and I said similar, for a lower price, but the one that they're selling at Macy's has more features and more benefits, so the perceived value is higher.
Well, Walmart's business model is they go to the manufacturer and they say, you sell it, you sell it to us at this price, or we'll go to somebody else. And so it's really like they have no choice in a sense, these companies. Walmart goes into the company and they say, either you give it to us at our price, or we'll find someone else to give it to us at our price. So they then have to figure out their pricing structure to see if they can work with Walmart. Very rarely is somebody going to go to a different company once they're in Walmart, because they're already mass producing an item that that they fit their pricing structure to.
Yes and no. What I was responding to was specifically what he was suggesting, which is that there's conflict in managing channels. So there's a conflict. What he was suggesting in that scenario was that if you sell in one market or one country, that would prevent you from selling in 6 other countries. And I was drawing an analogy between that and selling at Walmart, where other retailers, if they know that you're selling your product at Walmart, they don't want to carry it because they know that Walmart is going to sell it at a lower price. So you would need to customize the product or service in some way that allows their competitors to save face. So it's not the same product. So for example, like with the iPad, so Walmart would carry, because they want to be the low-cost provider, so typically they would carry like the 16 gigabyte version of the iPad, whereas let's say Best Buy or another retailer would carry the 64 gigabyte iPad. And certainly there's a difference in price, right? A $200 difference for the suggested retail price. But you would say, well, that's not the same product. Of course, the one that they sell at Best Buy is $200 more, but you have, what, 4 times the storage capacity, for example.
We also have with Walmart. Walmart tends to be cheaper products. Like, for instance, a company that I work with does business with Walmart, and the thing is that they get cheaper products because if I say with the Apple iPad, if someone returns the Apple iPad because it's defective, they're just going to chuck it and give them credit and then go after Apple. So such premium companies will not go into Walmart because they don't want to deal with it. Such as Best Buy, if you bring in a defective item, they have personnel that know how to fix it, that know how to deal with it. So it's also going with different class, such as Best Buy is more prestigious, they have more expensive items, they know how to deal with it. With Walmart, just caters to the cheap, which if it's defective, okay, they'll throw it out, they'll give you credit, and they'll go to the company saying, okay, we don't really want, like, just give us credit for this because it's a defective item, we're not going to fight over it. So it's once and done. So I guess that's, wouldn't that be a little too negative towards a big company going into Walmart?
Well, you have to decide whether or not your distribution is going to be exclusive, selective, or intensive. So if you just want to sell at Walmart, maybe you're okay with that. But some companies want to have intensive distribution, which means that they want to sell their product everywhere. They want to sell their product at Walmart, Kmart, Target, and they want to sell it at Macy's, Bloomingdale's, Saks, Nordstrom's, Walgreens, CVS, Rite Aid, Duane & Reade. So it depends. That's fine. Some companies do have an exclusive distribution strategy where they have an agreement with a particular retailer and they're the sole distributor of the product. That might be fine. The management team might be okay with that. But we're also looking at other options. And other options means that we might want to sell at not just one retailer, but at multiple retailers or in multiple channels of distribution. Questions about that? All right, next question.
Eight.
Right, number 8. Okay, go ahead.
Which of the following is a question that is not likely to be generated by phase 2 of the international planning process? This could be E, which country market to make a market investment in.
Right, so the best answer, which is on page 343, is E, which country market to make a market investment in. So who could tell us what it is that we're talking about when we're talking about phase 2 of the international planning process? So the question says, which is not likely to be generated? And that's what you share with us, is that which country to market to make a market investment in is not likely to be a question generated by phase 2 of the international planning process.
So the other 4 would be generated.
Right. So the other 4, right, which are, go ahead, tell us what they are.
The identifiable segments that allow for common marketing mix tactics across countries.
Right, so what does that mean? Who could tell us what that means? It says phase 2, one of the questions is, are there identifiable market segments, so can we identify market segments that allow for us to have common marketing mix tactics?
Within different countries, there could be a lot of similarities among taste or among or certain preferences of a product. So you could say, okay, so we have in Asia we find a country where and they have a preference for a high-line product that's has certain kind of packaging, and then we find somewhere in Europe that also there's another market that has the same preference. So there are 2 markets, totally different places, similar preferences.
Right, for a particular product, a particular flavor of a product, for example. So if you're going to be able to sell the same flavor of a particular product in multiple markets, that's what we're talking about here. If we talk about marketing mix tactics. So in some markets, we're going to customize the flavor, let's say. And in other markets, maybe we could use the same flavor without having to change it. So if we find that there's some commonality there, and that's what we mean when we're talking about common marketing mix tactics. That's an example. Or another might be, for example, our approach to promotion and advertising. So maybe outdoor advertising is most relevant, and that's going to be in multiple markets. All right, and what about the next one? Which cultural adaptations are necessary for successful acceptance of the marketing mix? So here it says that, well, maybe there isn't any common market mix tactics across countries, but how are we going to have to adapt the product so that we could sell it in that particular market? That's what we're trying to understand. So we're at the point where we've identified or accepted the level of political risk. Hopefully we feel that the political risk is very low. In general, we think the market is attractive. So we're okay with the political, regulatory, legal dynamics, trade dynamics, but now we're asking the question, well, how do we need to adapt the product so that we could sell it in that particular country? Will adaptation course allow profitable market entry? So in other words, if we do have to change aspects of the product, for example, are we still going to be able to be profitable in that market? So we want to customize the product as necessary, but we got to ask ourselves,
It's too expensive.
yeah, is the cost going to be prohibitive? All right, number 9. Go ahead.
For which of the following products is it advisable that a company have a direct sales force in the country where sales are to occur? I think it's big ticket industrial products, 8.
Right, so having a direct sales force for big ticket industrial items is definitely advisable. Why? First of all, what is a big ticket industrial item? What is that? What does that mean, big ticket industrial item?
Maybe something that, I mean, obviously something that's expensive, something that's very, very high end, and also it could be something that's used in factories or something used to manufacture other things.
Right, absolutely. You guys got that? Mm-hmm. So if that's the case, then you need to have a direct sales force. You need somebody who's going to visit the customer and is going to demonstrate the product and discuss the features and benefits of the product, because the person that you're selling to or the organization is going to have to spend a lot of money for that item. So it's a high involvement purchase. If you're purchasing a piece of equipment like you suggested, that's not something that you could just, you have an ad in a trade magazine. Okay, that's good to build awareness, but to really close the deal, you need somebody who's going to sit down, because you might be asking them to spend $50,000 or $150,000 or $1 million. They're not going to just go to your website and order that, right? You need somebody who's going to be responsible for negotiating the deal.
Why wouldn't you need that for cars also?
For cars?
Yeah, one of the options is automobiles.
Well, what do you guys think about that? What about the other options?
I mean, how many people buy cars like via ads or not through an actual salesperson?
Right, so it says, do you think that we need to have a direct sales force in order to sell automobiles?
Oh.
So do we need it to sell cosmetics? Do we need to sell automobiles? Or do we need to sell computer accessories or big ticket industrial items?
No, I know that big ticket industrial items absolutely make sense, but I'm also asking about automobiles. Why wouldn't that make sense?
Automobiles would be maybe not necessarily. Meaning some people it's a high involvement purchase, and some people are gonna dot every I and cross every T. But at the end of the day, there are certain people who might not look that much into a car purchase.
I'm saying, do you know anyone who's bought a car not through another salesperson?
I know the textbook says that one. Take it up the textbook.
No, I'm just asking.
Right, well, it has to do with the level of, well, wait a minute. I think we'd have to make a distinction here between dealing with a salesperson and what we mean when we talk about direct sales force.
Okay.
All right, so like direct sales force, of course, if you go into a car dealership, they have salespeople there. But that's different if you have a direct salesperson where maybe for Maseratis they have direct salespeople. That means you go to a CEO's office and you sit down and you're spending a lot of money for a Maserati or a Rolls Royce or whatever the car is that you're spending $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 for. Then you're going to have a direct salesperson, which is different from having a sales representative at the counter. Right? We have salespeople in Macy's, we have salespeople even in Walmart, but that's different from having a direct sales force. I mean, they're calling on the customers. With the car dealership, generally the salespeople are not calling on the customers are calling on the salespeople, so to speak, right? You go to the dealership and there's a salesperson there. That's different from a salesperson reaching out to you because they have a list of wealthy individuals and they send you a letter or they call you or they make an appointment to come to your office because they're trying to sell you a car that sells for $500,000. So I think that's the
Distinction.
yeah, the distinction that's relevant to this particular question. All right, number 10, contractual agreements serve as a means of transfer of rather than, so go ahead, tell us.
Knowledge rather than equity.
Right, so contractual agreements serve as a means of transfer of knowledge rather than of equity. So that's talked about on page 346. What does that mean? Why is it not transfer of equity as opposed to knowledge? Why is it not the transfer of money rather than profit? Why is it knowledge and equity and not any of the others?
I'm going to say, well, you have a skill that you're bringing to the table, and hopefully they have a skill that they're bringing to the table, or maybe not necessarily skill. It could be, a technology or an insight into something. So you're basically, you're paying for their knowledge of this, whatever it is you're doing, your joint venture, or whatever it is you're doing with them, because you don't have what they have.
And what's the concern that we talked about in doing that? What do we need to be concerned about? Because as it says here, the contractual agreement is a transfer of knowledge. And so why do we care about that? Why should we be concerned if we have a contractual agreement as part of a joint venture like you're saying?
So one company doesn't claim that they invented the technology while the other one actually did?
Well, that would be one of the potential risks.
Protection, maybe.
Yeah, so you're more than likely, as you were suggesting, sharing some type of trade secret, whether it's a formula or some type of intellectual property. And what if the joint venture falls apart? If you decide to dismantle the joint venture, well, now, like it says here, you've transferred all your knowledge. They know everything you know. They know how to make the product now. So like we become obsolete. We show them how to make the product. They have no technology. We show them how to develop the technology, how to implement the technology, how to manufacture the product, and then they say, well, you know, we don't really need this joint venture anymore. So that's something that we need to be concerned about when we form a joint venture, because they're sharing, you're sharing, but what about maybe what you're sharing is worth more than what they're sharing? And there's a greater risk for us. Because maybe they're not sharing knowledge or expertise or trade secrets. Maybe what they bring to the joint venture, which is important, but maybe they bring access to channels of distribution, which is certainly very significant. So in other words, they already have a sales force that calls on retailers to try and get distribution. Or they already have distribution at certain retailers where they could now try to get this product on the shelf. So they already have a relationship with several dozen retail organizations. So that's certainly meaningful to us. They already have a distribution center, but they don't make the product. So we tell them how to make the product. Now they got everything they need to know, and that's a risk because we're sharing the knowledge. All right, let's look at quiz C. Questions?
I only have 12.
Oh, because you came late, right?
Thanks. Well, backhanded compliment.
All right, so who's going to read the first one?
Should I just start?
Smith.
Especially because this time I have the right one.
Yeah.
Even though most companies claim high performance quality when the product leaves the factory is still the place where most products are damaged in global market. False.
Right. That's on page 362.
Transportation.
So it says, even though most companies claim high performance quality, when a product leaves the factory is still the place where most products are damaged in global marketing. So remember last time we talked about the difference between perceived quality and performance quality? That's what we're talking about here, is the importance of maintaining performance quality. And what they suggest here is actually false. So that's something that we need to solve for as an organization. We need to achieve performance quality. It can't just be that we say it's a high quality or the product provides certain features and benefits. It really has to do that. And in fact, here it suggests the factory is still the place where most products are damaged in global marketing, and that's not really true in global marketing. That one of the challenges that we face is not that the product was defective when we made it, or that when we loaded it on the truck, or the train, or the boat, but that it's damaged in the process. So that's one thing to say, well, we make the product in New Jersey and we're shipping it to Connecticut. Well, the chances of having significant damage to the product is limited. But what about if you manufacture the product in China? When they made the product in the manufacturing facility, the product didn't have any defects. The product was fully functional, had a high level of performance quality. But then we loaded it onto the truck, and then the truck took it to the dock, and we put the products into a container and put it on a ship that was at sea for 45 days to get from China to the United States. And then from there is transported to different distribution centers everywhere in the United States. Well, in that case, yeah, it's likely that something could happen that would damage the product. All right, next question. What about this? From a sociological viewpoint, any idea perceived as new by a group of people is an innovation.
True.
Yeah, that's true. So perception becomes reality. So the fact that people perceive that the product is new, that it's innovative, is all that really matters. And didn't we see that as being true as it relates to the introduction of the iPod? Because remember we said Apple didn't invent the MP3 player. But because of their very compelling branding strategy and marketing approach, the level of awareness for MP3 players increased significantly. So they did a terrific job of increasing category need, what we said also sometimes referred to as primary demand. And the fact that MP3 players existed before that, do you guys realize that? That the iPod was not the first MP3 player on the market. MP3 players were sold prior to that, but that's a good example of, well, the perception is that it was something that was new. It was something that was innovative. All right, number 3. Go ahead, who's going to read number 3? Somebody, anybody. All right, go ahead, Evan.
The perceived attributes of the innovation is a variable which affects the rate of diffusion of a product. That's true.
Right. So that's true. That's in reference to the adoption curve model, also referred to as the diffusion of technology model, that was put forth by Everett Rogers. And 3 variables are the degree of perceived newness, the perceived attributes of the innovation, and the methods used to communicate the idea. What about price? What role does price play in the diffusion of innovation? Or does it not play a role? What do you think? Does it play a role?
Likeliness to buy?
Yeah, certainly in an elastic market, the lower the price, the more people that are likely to buy the product. So when the price goes down, more people are going to adopt the product. And that's, we were just talking about that, the different components of that model, the innovators, the early adopters, the early majority, the late majority, the laggards, which I like to refer to as non-adopters. What we want to try and do is accelerate the rate of adoption, the rate at which people are going to purchase the product. And ideally, we're going to have enough manufacturing capacity to meet demand. All right, number 4. The newness of a product or brand introduced can be an important competitive advantage.
True.
Right, absolutely. The brand is what's wrapped around the product, and certainly having a power brand wrapped around your product will have a significant impact on the rate at which your product is adopted. So take, for example, Toyota. Toyota is a master brand for the Toyota Motor Sales USA company. So the Toyota master brand also has a series of sub-brands. like for example, Echo, Corolla, Solara, Camry, Avalon. Now, why would somebody purchase the Avalon? Let's say we just came out with a car called the Avalon. Let's say us, our team. We decide that we're going to manufacture and sell a car. We decide that we're going to call the car Avalon. Which is going to result in a quicker rate of adoption? Our car called Avalon, or a car that's branded Toyota Avalon? Toyota Avalon. So that's, I think, a good example of where being associated with a powerful master brand or a well-known manufacturer that has a favorable brand attitude, a very high level of awareness, is going to influence the rate of adoption. Remember, we said the value of the Coca-Cola brand is $68 billion. And we said that's just the value of the brand, not the value of their bottling equipment, not the value of the soda that they have in the warehouse, just the value of their brand. So certainly the brand is going to have an impact on the rate of adoption and is certainly a competitive advantage in the marketplace. All right, next question. Number 5. All right, Van Gruber, go ahead.
If you were looking for information and strategies on a product's brand name, you would find it under the packaging component of the product's component model. True?
Right, true. So the best answer is true. Page 374. If you are looking for information and strategies on a product's brand name, you would find it under the packaging component of the product component model. And the packaging component includes style features, labeling, trademarks, brand name, quality, price, and all aspects of the product's packaging. And that's why packaging is also an important branding element. The packaging is the silent salesperson at retail. So that's our last chance, really, is at the point of purchase to communicate with the target market. All right, number 6. Remember, we talked about this a little bit. Go ahead. Who's going to tell us about Gerber? They refer to here as a well-known baby food producer. Go ahead.
Well-known baby food producer that introduced small jars of baby food in Africa, complete with labels featuring a picture of baby experience, a classic example of misinterpreted symbols. Consumers thought it was a ground of babies in a jar. This would be an example of a problem with the packaging component in the product component model. True.
Right, absolutely. So we need to understand the market. The expectation is that what's on the label is what's in the jar. So we need to make sure that we understand that from market to market what the expectations are. So yeah, in terms of creating an association between the brand and the face of a cute baby, sounds like a good idea, but we need to understand in every market that we sell the product how that's going to be perceived. Are they going to perceive that as meaning that the brand is something that sells products that are relevant to babies, or safe for babies to use, or safe for cute babies to use, or does that image, does that picture mean that that's what's in the bottle? Which is not like crazy. Like you might think, well, the baby to be in a bottle is a little unusual, right? But think about all the products that we buy. Don't they show you on any can of beans, what do you see on the label? Is a picture of the beans. So you would think, well, that's what's in the can. They show you the beans, or they show you pineapple, or whatever it is, it's in the can. So we need to make sure that we address that. Number 7. Go ahead.
One of the consistencies that marketers can afford to when marketing products abroad is that in general almost all labeling laws worldwide are essentially the same. That's false.
Yeah, that's definitely false. And we, if we're not customizing the product, this is an alert. You need to customize the packaging. And unfortunately, the packaging laws around the world vary from market to market. So there's not any standardization on a global level as it relates to packaging. In some countries, it might be similar, but that's why when you see packages and labels that are trilingual, for example, so trilingual packaging, it's not ideal because the packaging becomes cluttered, but that's the reason why, is because in particular markets, they say, well, if you sell a product in our market, then the packaging, the label, needs to be in Spanish. Or maybe it needs to be in Spanish and English. So we need to be able to address that, and unfortunately, yeah, what they suggest here is false. That it's not a consistency. It's something that varies from market to market. One of the things, though, that we should keep in mind is that the logo, for example, or graphic representations of the brand do not need to be translated in most markets. So your logo or the symbol, right, that's not something that, that's part of your brand identity, and you're not required in many markets to have to translate the brand name per se to that particular market. But it depends on the market.
Out of curiosity, like in China where a symbol can also be a brand, is that ever an issue? Where like a character can actually represent a brand?
Well, if the character represents a brand, then what would you anticipate the issue being?
Meaning that it might not apply to all international markets because it loses its meaning.
Well, if it's a symbol, then we don't expect people to read it. It's just a graphic representation of the brand that doesn't include the brand name. Or maybe, maybe the same is true of Pepsi, the logo, the Pepsi logo outside of the US. Maybe in some markets, because they're not able to read the brand name, that it actually becomes a symbol because they can't read it. All right, have a good night.